Thanks. Good morning, everyone. We are live now. Welcome to this session on farmer culture and field stories. This is a presentation by MSU Extension for Easterseals, but if you're watching this recording, then hopefully you can gain something. Yeah, Katie, would you mind just introducing yourself and maybe a little bit of behind the ground? No?
Yeah, of course. Sorry. Good morning. I'm Katie Kogelman. I'm the director out here in Genesee County for Easterseals Mork, and we're super excited to be taking on this farm stress venture, supporting farmers and doing some outpatient therapy and outreach with our farmers. I myself come from a background of farming. My dad was a farmer, and I'm also a farmer, and I have cows. I know recently Rummy and I were talking, and I said, I gotta go, my bull's down. So we've had, I know all these kind of farm stress situations. So I'm super excited to be part of this, and happy to have my team here learning from all of you. So
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, I envision that a lot of people here and people watching at home, you have experience in agriculture. And I, just as my first little disclaimer here, I don't pretend to be an expert in all things ag. I have, a background in agriculture. I'm a fifth generation cattle farmer. My father, he still raises cattle, and then went away to school, earned my PhD in health psychology, and then now work for MSU Extension. But I don't want to say that, in the hour and a half, 2 hours that we're together today, that we'll cover every aspect and facet of farmer culture. And I don't want to pretend that I'm an expert on all things either. And so, all of us here, in some way are connected to agriculture. We all eat food. And so we all have a different perspective on this. I just wanted to acknowledge that before we get into it. I also want to take a moment just to provide a brief overview of the agenda today so that we can understand what's coming ahead. So this is the welcome and overview portion of the presentation. And then, we'll go into, we'll do an introduction of the other speakers that we've invited today, a couple experts from MSU. Really happy that they were able to join. Then we'll get into understanding farmer culture. What's the definition and different characteristics of farmer culture. We'll talk a bit about historical, societal factors that have shaped farmer culture, and learn about some unique stressors and challenges that farmers face. I don't want to say that it's all doom and gloom. There's obviously some really, really attractive things about farming that people, stay in ag and return to ag, and we'll talk more about that too. We'll hear from Corey Clark, MSU Extension professional, on the financial landscape, succession planning, a little bit about that and how that ties into farmer culture. And then the second big part of the talk will move into the impact on mental health. And so how these unique characteristics of farmer culture impact behavioral health for farmers. We'll talk a little bit about common mental health issues faced by farmers. We'll hear from Tanner Durr, another MSU Extension professional, on how isolation and loneliness impacts farmers and how that is like how there's unique connections there to agriculture. We'll talk a bit about how farmer culture influences mental health outcomes, and then a little bit on stigma and barriers to seeking mental health care in farming community. The third portion of our talk today, I'll go over some what I think are effective therapeutic approaches for farmers. And so how can we better adapt our approaches to connect with this audience and this population? And so, including culturally sensitive therapy approaches for farmers, the importance of building rapport and trust with farmers. All of us, I'm sure, none of the things that I'm going to talk about today, I think, are going to be completely foreign to you. So I just want to bring up these ideas, these concepts, and maybe you can incorporate this into your own work or think about things that you're already doing and how you can maybe pivot slightly to, better engage this population. Then I'll share some practical strategies for incorporating farmer culture into your work. And then finally, the fourth portion of today, I have called case studies. And so I have some real life case examples working with farmers. And so, there'll be a discussion around challenges and successes that I've encountered, lessons learned, some best practices for working with farmers. I'll open up the floor to hear some other real life case examples. And, even if there's not a really clear lesson learned from that, I think just going through and reflecting on those real life examples, it will be valuable. And then we'll wrap up, recap some of the key points, call to action for, all of us to beyond this webinar to, improve our understanding of farmer culture. As I said right off the start, this isn't going to be a replacement for, getting out and talking with farmers, going to the farmers markets, and, even getting on the farm and doing a farm tour. There's things that we will be able to do going forward to better understand this population. And then I'll open the floor up for Q&A. So yeah, we'll just get into this now. Once again, I'm Remington Rice, health and farm stress educator. I lead the farm stress project with MSU Extension, and I'm excited to talk to you today about farm culture. I'm a fifth generation farmer, as I said, and this is something that's been integral to my life, my entire life. I grew up in 4-H, partaking in 4-H and FFA, and agriculture is something that's very near and dear to me in my personal life. And as you all know, farmers play an important role in our society. It's as simple as this: no farmers, no food. And so they're, under having us understand their unique culture and way of life, is essential for us to provide effective care. So here's a picture of me working with a couple, a veterinarian on the left, and then a manager of a turkey farm in Muskegon, Michigan. 30,000 turkeys behind me. That was a really interesting day, but I want to pause here and just allow our other speakers, Tanner and Corey, to introduce themselves. Corey, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Corey Clark. Excuse me, I am a farm business management educator for MSU Extension. I work primarily in the Thumb region, and I do financial analysis, record keeping support, succession planning. I work with a lot of farms on succession planning, and other assorted business planning type issues that farmers are working their way through.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tanner Durr. I'm a health educator with MSU Extension. I do a lot of work with the farm stress team. So delivering programs on managing farm stress. My health education work broadly, managing chronic disease. We do a lot of mindfulness presentations and promoting mental health. So I'm excited to share with you all today what we have.
Thanks, Tanner and Corey. So this is a slide here that covers some of the services that we have offered historically through the MSU Farm Stress program. And of course, we have a new partnership with Easterseals, as Katie shared. I'm a health I'm a health educator. I'm not a finance or business management educator. And so I tap on people like Corey and Stan, who also joined this meeting, to really help with those other parts. And, finances are one of those, maybe the most stressful aspect about farming. And so has been a critical partnership within MSU Extension. We, as you can see here, you can scan the QR code or go to our website to learn more. Our mental health first aid course has been really helpful. It's almost in a way like CPR, but for what to do if you're in a mental health crisis. We have a wonderful, teletherapy offering too. And then now with Easterseals, we have more services to offer there, but just wanted to provide that quick little overview. So this is a photo of my farm. I just wanted to, make this more real. So that's the silo in the background, been standing there for over 100 years. And yeah, I just want to start the discussion with, what exactly is farmer culture? And, farmer culture refers to the unique characteristics, traditions, and values that are specific to the agricultural community. These traits will differ, as I said kind of at the start, a 30-year-old farmer from Mexico will have different values than a 65-year-old farmer from Traverse City, Michigan. So there's going to be exceptions to almost everything we talk about today. However, in general, farmers have a really strong sense of community, self-reliance, and pride in their work. And this culture is shaped by historical and societal factors, such as the challenges of farming, rural life, economic pressures, and family traditions. So here's some key aspects of farming culture I want to mention, and then I'll hand it over to Corey to go on a little bit deeper dive here. But there's this focus on hard work. One of the defining characteristics of agriculture is agricultural culture, that is the value placed on hard work. And farm work often does require a significant amount of physical effort and long hours. Many farmers pride themselves on their work ethic, and this value can be passed down through generations, with children like myself growing up in farming families, learning the value of hard work from a young age. And farmers may take pride in their struggles, and this can play a role in their hesitancy to seek help. If grandpa was able to struggle through without therapy or additional supports, then I should be also following through on that, and following in his steps. If he was able to do it without assistance, why can't I? Of course, things are different now, and grandpa didn't necessarily need to suffer alone. And I may be talking about myself here too, but hard work is one of the keystones of farm culture. And then self-reliance, another defining aspect of farm culture is self-reliance. Farmers oftentimes, they have to be self-sufficient and self-reliant. So this isn't necessarily born out of a desire to be self-reliant, but they often work in remote areas and have limited access to resources. This can be compounded by the long hours and the hard work and the physical demands of farming. This can limit opportunities to socialize and pursue outside interests. If you get home at the end of the day, you're exhausted. You may not want to travel 30 minutes into town to go socialize, or it's just increasing friction in engaging with that behavior. And so, this value on self-reliance, it extends to the ability to problem solve independently and the importance of taking responsibility for one's actions. So you can see how this ties into a hesitancy, or at least a barrier to seeking help. Another important component is stewardship. So farmers often have a deep respect for their land, and it's not just a resource to them, but also a deeply personal and spiritual connection. I have this connection, my dad certainly does, with our farm. It's a legacy to be protected and passed down through the generations. And anything that would threaten that connection can be an immense source of stress. That could be one of the most stressful stressors that farmers face, is something threatening the land. That I always talk about in other presentations I give, the example of like a dentist working in an office. The office burns down. That's going to be stressful for the dentist. They have to file insurance and find a new office. But with a farmer, if something was going to threaten the farm, there's no replacement for the memories and the tradition and the improvements and changes that you've made to that land. So this stewardship component, the other side of this is Farmers are often at the mercy of weather patterns and other natural phenomenon, which can significantly impact their crops and livelihood. So this stewardship, this connection with the land can be a source of great meaning, but this also can create uncertainty and stress. Farmers may have little control over these external factors. So there's this stress that's tied up with the land, but it's also giving them meaning, just a unique part of this. And then also community. So there's community, and then there's one other part, and then I'll hand it over to Corey. Strong sense of community. People working in agriculture are often part of a really close-knit community where individuals support and help each other. Family and neighbors, they may play a critical role in the wake of a crisis or natural disaster or market downturns. Being able to turn, my dad can tap on other farmers in the area, if a machine breaks down, and we can have them come and help. And so this sense of community, is often seen at local events like fairs, farmers markets, auctions, anywhere farmers can come together and share their experiences and knowledge. And this part is critical for us to understand, and can be a key area for us to connect with farmers. And then finally, this value of tradition, and the importance of faith too. Agricultural communities, oftentimes place a high value on tradition, following certain farming practices, maintaining a certain way of life. And this sense of, this tradition can foster community and can also be a connection to the past. The way Matthew Rice 5 generations ago would herald the land, and, the traditions around holidays, that's a way for us to connect with the past. And, many farmers also hold religious or spiritual beliefs, and this can provide comfort or guidance during difficult times. And so this is just another part that we should be aware of. These beliefs can be closely tied with their connection with their land and their sense of purpose. So just another important part for us to be aware of. And so with that, I want to hand it over to Corey. I'll stop sharing my screen and let her share. And we'll hear a little bit about finances and succession. Take it away, Corey.
Okay, do we have my screen?
Yep.
Wonderful. So yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about the finances of farming as a business and how that impacts some of the aspects around farming. And one of the challenges of farming as a business is that farming isn't just a business. It's also an identity. It's a way of life. It's this multifaceted, multidimensional experience and way of being for a farmer. At the same time, it is relevant to whether the farm survives, and it has its own impacts on stress and mental health. So where I thought I would start is that I also, like Remington, I'm also from a multi-generational family farm. These are 2 pictures of my family farm. On the left here is quite a while ago. This is me in the picture. This is my dad in the picture. This is the barn that was in the side yard. I'm on that sign. We had maybe 120 dairy cows at the time. This is, again, 20 years ago or so. My grandpa took 12 cows down from his dad to this location, grew a farm into 60 or 80 cows. My dad took over and continued to grow the farm. And then this is the current generation of farmers. My dad was actually farming with his brother, who's quite a bit younger, 16 years younger. My dad has since slowly retired in a like farmer retiring sort of way, where you slow down a little bit and then you take a little less responsibility, and then but stay involved in the farm for like 15 more years. So he is progressively retired, as my cousins here Aaron and Kyle have progressively taken on more responsibility. They are now in their 20s and 30s and taking on some financial responsibility as well as management responsibility, and our farm is actively growing and going on to the next generation. This is the pattern that farmers a lot of times envision, with the family farm going from generation to generation. And on one hand, my family tells a great story. On the other hand, it's been an extremely stressful experience, and pretty much everybody along the way could have used a lot of therapy and nobody got it. So it was a very stressful experience, and mental health was at various stages for every single person that was involved on this farm. So backing up kind of to the more general story, if you will, farming is a treasured way of life for pretty much every farmer. They believe, for all the reasons that Remington was talking about, they believe very strongly in all the aspects of the culture. They love the production. It's a very family-oriented business. Most people are getting their kids involved in the farm at some point. So it's a place to raise your kids, and it's also like love of the actual production, working with cows, driving a tractor, taking care of the land, those sorts of things. At the same time, farming is also a business, and you kind of can't get away from that. And I think given a choice, farmers probably would get away from that, but it's the necessary nature of continuing to farm. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the dynamics of that and how that, again, ultimately impacts mental health and stress. So the fun part is the raising and selling crops and cattle. You know, the no farms, no food aspect. They're producing food. But at the same time, there's a ton of expenses. And this is just a brief list of all the things that farmers need to pay for in order to raise their crops and their cattle: chemical seed fertilizer, feed and vet, all those sorts of things. And so what that translates to is a business also that requires a lot of investment. So not only are you paying for a lot of expenses, you're also translating to this business that is requiring some very expensive asset investment. So most farm businesses are supporting one family. Some of them are larger and supporting more than one family. The examples I'm going to give you are basically a sustainable, economically sustainable one family farm. So one example of a capital investment that's necessary for raising crops is a combine, the harvester. And a new combine that one might invest in right now is about $700,000. And that is just one piece of equipment. In addition, for raising crops, they would also need a tractor, a planter, a sprayer, all of which are multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars. Most family farms that are fully supporting a family have at least $1 million in equipment, frequently more. The herd of cows is probably worth about $1 million. Now, nobody's actually putting forth that money to buy those cows. That has been built up over time. But again, these are the capital assets that are involved in farming. Where a dairy farmer does put out money is at some point they're going to need a milking parlor. You can get by with building a milking parlor every 20 or 30 years, but at some point, especially as farms expand, which economically sustainable farms are expanding at some point in some sort of way, doing a milking parlor, putting in a milking parlor right now costs about $2 million. And finally, farmland. Farmland is an important way to guarantee land access. It tends to be the one asset farmers really want. It's also the one asset that is really, really expensive, probably more so than its ability to generate money and revenues at any particular time. So this is about 500 acres. So if you have a 1,000-acre farm, they might own 500 acres and rent 500 more. This represents about 500 acres. So yes, not any of these farms are going to invest in all of these things at once, but these are the rolling assets that farmers are investing in over time. And this is, again, one family for one farm. So if the farm is generating consistent and sufficient profits, it isn't a problem to pay for those things. It's overwhelming, but it's not a problem. However, they start with this family farm starts with like $1.6 million in farm income, and that seems like a lot, and it feels like a lot, and it's a lot of money to go through their checkbook, but at the same time, they're paying out somewhere in the $1.3 million range, leaving about $300,000 for farm profit. Okay, this is a fairly, these are reasonable numbers that we might like to see on a farm, but for the size of these investments and the size of this farm, the profit numbers and ultimately the family living numbers start to get much smaller. So if you have $300,000 in profit, you're probably making about $250,000 in debt payments a year. And the family's probably living on something like $50,000. The average is about 60, so this might be a little bit low in terms of the average, but these are the kind of numbers that we're working with. However, there's always a however, right? Consistent profits can make this work. However, profits aren't necessarily consistent. There's a ton of risks involved in farming, and these risks keep farmers up at night. They're extremely stressful. Price risk is a big one. Crop prices vary over time. They might be high, they might be low. Low prices would not be sustainable numbers. High prices give you just a little bit of room to breathe, and it's always changing. Weather risk is a big one. My family has lived by the weather report for generations. Even retired, my dad checks the weather every morning, and it determines what he does for the day. And of course, you can see with the corn on the side, dry weather can damage yield. And so production risk is also a big problem. Weather influences the cattle and how much milk they give. Health of both the cattle or livestock and the farmer. If they have health issues, at some point that can jeopardize their ability to manage the farm. Safety is a huge concern. Am I going to have enough labor to do to accomplish the work that needs to be accomplished? On a vegetable farm, for example, you need a number of people. It's very labor intensive, and you need a number of people to go out and harvest, say, the asparagus. You've put all of the expenses into growing it. You're ready to generate the revenue to pay for those expenses. But if there's not labor available, there's no way to get it out of the field. So labor risk is another one that's highly stressful. Pest risk in crops, liability risk with tractors on the road and cattle in barns that might be near the road. This is huge. And policy risk, you don't know what the government programs may or may not do in the future. And there's probably more risks than this. This was just the size of a risk list that would go down the page. The result of those risks is that profits really aren't consistent. This is just a return on assets graph since 2000. And as you can see, they're all over the place. Good years, bad years, those risks, price and weather impacted farms across the board. And these are the kinds of things that happens. And the average return on assets from income is 2%. So again, the average return on assets since 2000. The number we like to see is more like 8%. When we're evaluating farms, for example, and we have our green, yellow, red up and down the page, 8% is green. That's what we really want to see. And there were times in the past when that has been accomplished. It is not something that's been very common more recently. And if you get off the farms to a non-farm small business, we want to see something more like 10%. So the variability in profit and the level of profit create financial stress for farmers in terms of creating those profits that are needed to pay the debt, that are needed to invest in the assets and support the family. And so one of the things that's happening is debt is increasing. It's not being paid off faster. It's not going down. We might like to see debt be consistent as farmers are reinvesting and paying that debt. It's pretty consistent for equipment and debt, but land values have gone up so fast that as farmers have invested in real estate, the amount of debt that it's required to take on is greater and greater. And as you can see, since 2000, it's gone up and up and up and up and up. Well, prices haven't gone up and up and up and up. Profits haven't gone up and up and up and up. the pressure on farms to pay those debts is increasing, and it's requiring some real thinking about what will it take to make my farm sustainable. And I'll talk about in a minute. One of the things that is really hard for farmers to get their head around is change, for a variety of reasons. But that's what a lot of farms are looking at, is a need to grow, and grow in different ways, and grow differently than they have in the past, in order to address the increasing need for investment, the profit, needing more profit, to pay more debt. So the last financial page I want to show you is liquidity. So liquidity is kind of the more technical term that means, can the farm pay its bills? And so this is a graph of one of the liquidity ratios over time, the ability of farms to pay their bills. What this feels like to a farmer, this is the number that farmers really feel. Most of those numbers from before, right, require some financial analysis, which is why we put financial analysis as part of this program, so that farmers can get a handle on, what is my income for a production year, my expenses for a production year, what do I need for debt, what am I paying off in debt, what's my return on assets. Those numbers are kind of hidden. Farmers don't usually know those numbers. They require financial analysis. What they do feel is this liquidity. This is essentially how tight the checkbook feels. And liquidity, the ability to pay bills, has gone down over time, but it's been up and down a little bit. And this is basically how tight the checkbook feels. And it's been getting tighter and tighter through the 2010s. Sometimes when it gets really, really tight, farmers have just a moment to breathe, and it goes up a little bit, and then it comes right back on down. And it's in part because the profits are not sufficient to meet all the needs of the farm. So financial stress is not only high and based on risks and variability, but also that things are getting tighter and tighter and tighter. So where this brings us to is farmers needing to look at change. And if things are not sustainable right now, it might be the current generation, the current farmer, that is looking at some kind of pivot to the business. And that can be really stressful, because they've built their life and their identity on, say, raising their crop and selling it to a business. They raise their corn, they sell it to the elevator. They raise their milk, they sell it to the processor. But maybe they're starting to need to think about building a creamery, let's say, and selling to customers, or investing, taking a harder approach to technology and making more capital investment, and then having to hire more labor. All of these things are adjustments to how they have thought about their farm in the past. And that's just for the current generation. The future generation is needing to come up with new ways to grow the business. And that sometimes is farmers want this legacy to continue, but at the same time, it's hard for the older generation who has built this farm up in a certain way to think about the business changing over time as the younger generation takes this on. It creates relationship challenges and communication challenges in this process of succession planning. And the need for mental health assistance in succession planning for pretty much everybody involved is high. One needs to, in order to address the change, one needs to improve their mental health in order to take on these challenges, and then maintain their mental health as they take them on and make these decisions and implement these processes. Complicating this further is that these stresses have been handed down from generation to generation. Back as far as like the Dust Bowl and such, the generations have faced these huge financial issues that have created huge financial trauma, and they continue every so many years. The current older generation of farmers, say in their 60s and 70s, went through the farm crisis of the 80s, created a ton of financial trauma. Interest rates went way up. There were a lot of adjustable mortgages, adjustable loans, and their interest rates went way up, and they could no longer service their loans. A lot of farms went out of business in the 80s. Banks came in and repossessed their land. It was a horrible thing for those farms, and they've dealt with trauma over a period of time, but it was also really hard on the farms that survived. They may have gone through some of the financial issues, but as a survivor, as terrifying as that was, that financial trauma has carried on it unresolved in these 60 and 70-year-old farmers and made them risk averse, had real impacts on how they think about their farm. And the younger generation has learned from this traumatized older generation, but also has experienced the low prices and higher expenses of their generation. So these things are compounding from generation to generation and influencing both their own mental health and the relationships as they deal with across generations. So in order to keep moving forward, the issue of improving mental health to address these things, create healthy relationships, and continue on in the farm is absolutely essential. So that is, I mean, there's a lot more to talk about, which we will get to, which this program will get to. But as far as the financial issues of farming, we'll pause here. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you, Corey. I think that, piece about the intergenerational carryover effect is important for us to be aware of and understand how many layers there are to this. The farmer today is experiencing stress in markets, but that's in the context of the older generation saying, oh, here we go again, this is it. And then the other part that I really appreciated was how when I myself am feeling more stressed, I become less flexible. If I'm more stressed, then now it's even harder for me to decide what I'm going to have for dinner. It's like, no, I cannot entertain other options. I'm stressed. I got to have my pepperoni pizza or whatever it is. I can't entertain going out and like making a salad or like having a different option. And so, addressing that stress can be or is a vital piece of this, helping farmers pivot and change directions. If you're, I say redlining a lot. If your stress levels, you're really stressed and redlining, it makes it all the more difficult to pivot, to change, to adapt. And so, that's an important skill.
Agreed, completely.
Thank you, Corey. And then we can always open it up for questions again at the end. Mm-hmm. I see Florencia joined us. So we have another expert in the room, and she's a bit earlier than I expected. But Florencia, I just want to check in. Do you think you'd like to share something now or want to wait until closer to the end? I just want to be respectful of your time. I know you have to run eventually, so I want to give you room to speak.
Well, hi, everyone. Good morning. I think I would prefer to go now, and I don't really have a set of slides, so it should be very quick, no more than, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes.
Let's do it.
Okay. Well, good morning again. So I'm kind of going to go by the personal experience, sort of like both Corey and Remy started, because that really, and I think we all bring our own personal experiences to our work in extension, but that definitely, I think, defines at least those of us in the farm business management team. And so my personal experience is that I did not grow up in a farm, but my father did. And my family lost the farm before I was even born. So I am the, sort of the daughter of a farming family that went through that experience, and that has definitely, with the other examples that Corey shared, that has definitely carried through everybody. With everybody as we have continued our lives, so much so that that I work in agriculture, even though I do not own a farm. My sister, my mother went back to living in a rural area, and, growing gardens or having, rabbits and in like small production, like for homesteading type living. So another part of my experience is that I am an immigrant. I am of Hispanic origin. So that also really impacts the way I approach my work with extension and the types of people and types of farmers that I interact with in my role with extension. And this set of people carry their own, stresses and their own traumas. Remy was just using the word redlining in a way different than I had heard before. Granted, I'm not a native English speaker, so there's a lot of word uses that I am not familiar with, but the use of the word redlining that I am most familiar with is that Black farmers and Black people in general have been redlined out of areas, geographic areas where they might have been able, not that they are able to invest much because of, that generational, the impact of slavery and how it still lives in families' wealth. So I guess all I wanted to say is that there's also a group of people, whether they are people of color or not, that are trying to go back to farming because, those people also have the need, or some of those people also have the need of caring for the land, of connecting with the land, of growing something. But they face other set of difficulties, sometimes related to not having enough capital to invest, not having the background to even go get a loan. So sometimes they are based in cash. All they have to invest is the cash they have, and many times there's not even trust in the banking system. So they and that's very typical. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but many times us Hispanics will, just keep the cash under the bed type thing, not even put it in the bank. So, that just leaves people out of lots of systems that are designed for dealing with the more traditional farmer or business owner. Another issue is that for Hispanic families in particular, having many times come to the United States and or to Michigan specifically for working at farms, is that there's sort of like rejection of farming. It's like a double-edged thing where there's a rejection of farming because they are aware of how hard it is, and they just don't want to go through that again or for further generations, but they still have that need to grow something. So many times these people turn into gardeners or very small farm owners. And that's the type of people that I work with in my role with extension. I guess I just wanted to share, to put that picture in front of all of you in case it helps.
That it is helpful. Yeah, thank you, Florencia, for taking some time to join us and share that. I guess, is there anything else that, this population that you work with, any aspects of this culture in regards to like seeking mental health that you'd like to mention? I can think of a couple things, but
Yeah. I'm sorry I didn't address that, but thank you for asking the question. So I guess there's two ideas that came to my mind. One is that that I find that sometimes having had to face these types of situations more, sort of abruptly or forcefully, has improved family relationships, or has better maintained family relationships, because families have had to face, the consequences or the situation, whatever it was, of a bad situation that was sort of like posed on them from external forces more than internal forces. So I don't know if that makes sense, but if you have somebody else enslaving you, then this is not going to be the good way of putting it, but the blame and the fault is on somebody else. And so if you have your family and you're protecting them and you're sort of fighting against that, then that really strengthens internal relationships within the family. Or same goes for immigrants, or whoever is going through these situations that are sort of like externally posed on them. I don't know if that makes sense, but at least that's the experience in my family. We lost the farm and everybody still gets along well after, like a cycle after when everything was said and done. I think it really improved relationships because that stress just like was addressed. Whatever was causing, the farm to not be going well. There were health issues, there were financial issues. It was a set of issues. They had to be faced, and when facing them, that stress sort of releases and somehow improves. The other, I can't remember what was my other idea.
I could think of like a turning to a religious or spiritual leader, and the hesitancy to seek help from, an institute or mental health professional. I've seen that in my experience working with the migrant population, that there is, seeking help from the preacher or pastor instead of necessarily a mental health professional. Wondering if you can speak to that at all.
Not really. I don't think that that's wrong, but it does not necessarily reflect my experience. I feel that these and everybody's experience is different, so we have to, of course, say that. But my experience with these types of populations is that they are sometimes more into spiritual practices, and they do rely on those spiritual practices a lot. Yes, I totally agree with that. But sometimes they are like less traditional, more, broad, more or less like church, or less like, but yeah, in Latin America, there's also this and in my own personal experience, huge influence of the Roman Catholic Church. So, there's all sorts of ranges. There are all sorts of different ways one could approach that. But yeah, I have to agree that in different ways than the traditional American white farmer will, have church as part of their life. It doesn't look exactly the same, but spirituality is a big factor. Yes.
And you had another point that
Oh
come
yeah,
back
yeah,
to
but
you?
I still can't remember. So
That's okay.
Seeking mental health or mental help. Oh yeah, here it is. Thank you for giving me a minute.
Yeah.
The role of community, the role of family, and the role of cultural belonging, or cultural aspects, is really important. And again, this is not to say that it's not true of traditional farmers, but people of color, have very strong ties with their cultures, their origins, their families, and we lean a lot on that for a sense of belonging, a sense of well-being. And again, it's not a therapist many times. Although, just a note of color, did you know that Argentina, the country I'm from, has the most therapists per capita in the world? So Argentina, specifically within Latin America, is really big on therapy, but it's like a country specific thing. It's not really Latin America. But anyway, so yeah, leaning on other sources of support is a big thing, whether it's culture, family. Okay, and that's the end, I think. Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And yeah, if you think of anything else, we'll have a moment at the end to kind of share some real life examples and case studies. And so that'll be a good moment to do that. See if I can get my screen sharing here going again.
I was just going to mention that we do have a significant number of seasonal and migrant farm workers that AgriBility is serving, and wonder if you have any advice for us on making referrals to encourage them to seek mental health, the angle to come at it from, or just how to propose that to them.
Mm-hmm.
If you have any advice that way, I'd be interested in hearing it.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from Florencia on this too, but I think, meeting them where they are, going to, up here in Northwest Michigan, we have a Northwest Regional Migrant Council, and they will regularly hold functions like in the gymnasium up in Sutton's Bay, where they'll have a dentist come in, they'll have a vaccine booth or immunization booth, and other resources for migrant workers at the start of the season, at the end of the season. So seasonality, is an important factor in reaching this population. So meeting them in these areas, and then partnering with, well-trusted people in these communities. If I walked into, a migrant camp on a farm without being with another trusted individual, it's going to be really hard for me to, be able to connect with these folks. And so, we'll talk a little bit more about building rapport and trust. But that's my advice. We also have this really interesting resource. So this is a photo novella. It was developed by the University of Southern California School of Pharmacy. And it's this short, it's almost like a comic book would be the closest like American analogy to this. But it's a short story told through, these images and text blurbs of, oftentimes melodramatic language. And this has been shown empirically to increase help-seeking behavior. And so it tells the story of Rosalie, this character who is struggling with depression, and she, approaches her family members, and there's a hesitancy to talk about it. She eventually speaks with her primary care provider from the advice of an older gentleman in the story, and she's able to seek help that way. And then in the center of these booklets, we have additional advice, and then also a way for individuals to reach out to us. And the one study has shown that every one of these you get out into the community, 8 more will be, or it'll reach 8 people, so they oftentimes are handed out and shared. And this was something that I approached the Migrant Resource Council with. I don't want to step into these communities and say I'm an expert or be prescriptive. So I asked them if this would be something that would be helpful. And there's one woman on the council who pulled out a photo novella from her bag that was like duct taped and patched together. And she said that she received it like 8 years ago and she's been sharing it around with everyone. And so this was obviously something that they found to be helpful. Florencia, do you have any advice or tips on connecting with this population?
I think the things that you mentioned are good. The only other thing that I guess the only other two things that I can think of that may also apply to any other farmer would be one, perhaps first reach, like approach it as a family issue, and sometimes the wife or somebody in the circle is more likely to listen to you, and then it might be easier to reach usually the man, but does not always have to be that way. I didn't like being told perhaps I needed therapy when that happened to me, but it's easier to hear when it's somebody that you love that's telling you that than if it's somebody that feels like a threat. The other idea I had was, I think addressing other topics first to build trust, like financial issues, or it could be something else, is a way to start building that trust before talking about mental health. And also, in the specific case of farm finances, or it could be personal finances too, which MSU Extension also offers resources on. Those are things that will be helpful for the family or the person, and can start building that trust before starting to talk about mental health. I don't know. Those are the only other ideas that I thought of. Hope it helps, but you can also email me, Ned, if you want to talk more at some point.
Is that helpful, Ned? Great. Yeah, I really want to just echo what Florencia shared about these ripple effects that we see. And I've seen this time and time again, working with, farmer spouses, and then that, reverberating in their community. We have this weekly, Corey hosts this weekly Facebook Live. We call it lunch break every Wednesday at 12:30. I don't know if we'll make it today, but it's just a Facebook Live group. And oftentimes I've seen, the wives are in this space. They maybe the, husband has a Facebook profile, but he's not as active in general as the wife is. And so they can learn about these resources and then bring them back home. And so, I love causing these ripple effects to happen, and it's also helpful for us because our time is limited. And, oftentimes this work can be resource intensive. And so instead of trying to impact, meet everyone, we can just impact or connect with someone in the community, and then that can ripple out, or in the just family unit, and then that can ripple out to the rest of the family too. Actually, one of the case studies I'll share later is a great example of this, where grandma on the farm reached out. She knew the family was in need of help. I got her, or she enrolled in our teletherapy. And slowly but surely, over the next couple of months, 8 other family members joined teletherapy. And so, that's just a really good example of that happening. But just for the sake of time, so we're at 11 a.m. now. We'll go into impact on mental health. And so, we've brought up a lot of challenges that farmers face, and these challenges can impact their mental health. Studies have clearly shown that farmers are at a higher risk for depression, anxiety, and suicide than the general population. And the stigma surrounding mental health in the ag community can be a significant barrier to seeking help. And so I want to share what farmers report is negatively impacting their mental health. And then I'll hand it over to Tanner to go a little bit on a deep dive on isolation and loneliness as it relates to agriculture. But Farm Bureau, they did this wonderful public opinion poll. I think there are over 2,000 people who responded, all rural adults, so not necessarily farmers, but rural adults. And this is what they say. These are the words that they use to answer this question. So they were asked, what do you believe most negatively impacts behavioral health? We can see stress, weather, crops, money, economy. These are all big topics. And so, this poll and then other studies, support this, the daily uncertainty, as Corey brought up, the changes in liquidity, the stress of earning a living and keeping their farm, weather, that can be an acute or chronic stressor, the economy and financial stress, as we've talked a lot about, and then stigma and isolation. And, a lot of these issues, just going beyond the farmer, are societal. There is a larger landscape that's impacting rural adults. So there's like the uniqueness of agricultural stress, but then also another layer of that is, the expanded frame there. And with that, I will hand it over to Tanner. I'll stop sharing here and take it away, Tanner.
All right, thanks, Remy. Hopefully everyone can see my screen now. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about loneliness in farming. So I have a master's degree in public health. I'm approaching this from kind of like a more public healthy perspective, as opposed to that one-on-one, maybe therapy perspective or psychological perspective. And I just want to try to connect those dots between farm stress and farm loneliness. Why talk about loneliness? So oftentimes we're talking about stressors and stress and the impact of stress on the body. There's historically been a focus on stress with relatively little research on those feelings of loneliness and isolation. Feelings of loneliness can sometimes be hard to identify and understand and express. We know that loneliness is bad for your health. There's that famous finding from Julianne Holt-Lundstedt and her colleagues, where they found loneliness to be just as bad, if not worse, for your health as physical inactivity, obesity, air pollution, and that famous smoking up to 15 cigarettes per day. We know loneliness is related to a lot of mental health disorders, depression, anxiety. And so I think it's important to do a little deep dive into loneliness. Hopefully we can learn some new maybe frameworks or terms and break down the problem further. So with that, the primary source I'm using today was this really great article that got published at the end of last year from our friends across the pond over in Great Britain, where they analyzed this large survey of farmers, farm family members, and farm support staff. And they used a lot of that research. They had, quantitative results, qualitative results, and they went in and they looked at dimensions of loneliness and drivers of loneliness within the farming community. And this is the farming community at large. I think Florencia has shared a lot of really great points about, the need for kind of like taking an intersectional lens and approach and understanding that not all farmers or farming communities are the same. But we're going to go over some general findings and look at the 3 different dimensions of loneliness, which they found to be social loneliness, emotional loneliness, and cultural loneliness, kind of breaking it down into these 3 different spheres that they created in their conceptual model. So as we can see from the conceptual model, we have those double-sided arrows. It's hard to sometimes place these things in boxes that are just, this only fits here. Everything's all interrelated with each other. Sometimes loneliness can exacerbate stress. Sometimes stress exacerbates loneliness. So we see those 3 different types of loneliness. We see some of the drivers of loneliness as well. So those long working hours that impact social loneliness may also be tied to family tensions and expectations that impact emotional loneliness, which may also be related to a sense of disconnection or the contracting size of the farming community and cultural loneliness. So understanding that all of these pieces impact each other with farming culture and identities at the center. So really trying to make sure that we're understanding that this is all within the context of farming culture and identities, which we've touched on previously. You know, that hard work, the self-reliance, the stewardship, the importance of community, I think is going to be a major theme. So the first type of loneliness I want to just briefly discuss is social loneliness, which, so quality is always going to be important, the quality of our relationships. But with social loneliness, it's kind of the one that's most akin to social isolation, where we have this subjective perception of a deficit in the quality and quantity of our social connections. We feel like maybe I don't have as many relationships as I would like. Some of the contributing factors for social loneliness in farming include those long working hours. If you're working all the time, if you're working from sun up to sundown, it's probably going to be difficult for you to go out there and meet people. In addition to lone working, so if you're spending a lot of time working by yourself and you don't have a lot of coworkers, there's just not people around you. You can't form connections with people that aren't there. Another contributing factor that they found, another driver, is declining business related contact. So that might be things like, you know, instead of going down to the feed store to put in an order and meeting with people there, I'm, you know, ordering something online now, or there's just fewer contacts. In addition to that, geographical isolation. So, you know, you might be how many miles down a dirt road and there's just not people close to you or near you, especially with rural farming. And I also want to share, they had a lot of really great snippets from people that they interviewed. I really value that qualitative information, allowing people to tell their stories. So one example is from this farming man in his 30s who said, it's always quite hard to finish and not feel guilty because there's always something else to do. Inevitably, you're going to miss social events and everything else because you prioritize work. And that doesn't help with feeling left out of the loop. So if you always feel like there's work that needs to be done, it might always be on your mind. Like, I can't go do that. I can't go to that party. I can't go out to that restaurant. I can't go meet people at trivia night, whatever it is, because I have to do all this work. So that's going to reduce your ability to go out and make those connections. Here's another example of an older gentleman in his 60s who shared this kind of piece of wisdom. He said, so everybody has this image of farming being isolationist. And he says, in his opinion, farmers make it isolationist. It's like, you're working on your own. He said he's made sure that he's always had leisure time. He had this contractor come in who's an ex-young farmer. He's known all his life. And this ex-young farmer said, you know, I've been sitting on this tractor for 43 days drilling corn for everybody. Isn't that good? You know, really that value of hard work. Like, if I can just work harder and harder and harder, then that's going to be better for me. And this gentleman shared, he said, no, that's sad. Like, at least take a couple days off. There's always work to be done. If you're always focused on work, it's gonna be hard to make those connections and make time for yourself even. And then I think they captured a lot of really interesting stories from maybe the farmers' wives or other family members as well. So this farming woman shared, like, yes, it can be lonely for the women. You know, you get frustrated because they meet their husband and they're off on the tractor doing whatever. But once you start having children and you have all those family dynamics and obligations for your family, you have less flexibility. So there's a lot of lonely women out there with little kids. Believe me, it's not easy being a farmer's wife. So, you know, the importance of, it's not just the farmers, there's also the family component as well. There's the community component. But there's a lot of different layers to those social networks and different responsibilities and obligations. So next, that was our social loneliness piece. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about emotional loneliness. So for emotional loneliness, we're really focusing on that attachment, like that quality of connection. Having that close confidant is really beneficial for our health. It's one of the main components for resilience when we look at, you know, trauma frameworks or those toxic stress frameworks. There's an interesting study that came out in a recent survey last year. They found that 12% of Americans reported having 0 close friends. So no one that they felt like they could confide in, 12% of Americans. So for context, in 1990, the number of people that felt they had 0 close friends was 3% of the population. So we saw a 4 times increase. This is sometimes described as a more painful condition than social loneliness. Is, you know, you have some of that emotional pain that comes with this. And sometimes it might be present. You might have friendships, you might have a few different networks, but if you're not really deriving a lot of purpose out of that, if you're not feeling connected, like you belong in that community even, or if you belong in that relationship, and you can be lacking that quality and still feel emotionally lonely. So some of the contributing factors for emotional loneliness in farming is family tensions and expectations. So oftentimes people are working with family members, farms that have been in the family for generations, or you're working with, you know, cousins, you're working with parents on the farm. So it blurs that home and work boundary as well. You know, where normally maybe I would be able to come from home and, you know, vent to my mom, or I could vent to my dad or my cousin or my brother or sister, but I'm on the farm with them and we're kind of butting heads sometimes. And when we go home, we might take that with us, because home might also be our place of work. There's also business related stress and responsibilities that we've talked about, a lot of financial stressors, you know, climate and weather stressors, a lot of those external stressors that just can wear you down, and relationship difficulties as well. So if you're always stressed out, it might be hard to, at the end of the day, unwind and really focus on, you know, having those healthy relationships and those conversations. So here's an example about emotional loneliness. So this is another farming woman who said, you know, you have this massive bill come in, you think, how am I going to pay that? I mean, my husband doesn't take any notice. He just leaves the worrying to me. You know, he might be out there busy working on the farm, doing farm chores, whatever it is he's doing, and she's in doing the books and handling the bills. Said she feels quite alone when it comes to that. Somebody phones up and was unpleasant, and I thought, I've got nobody to confide in, because he wouldn't listen. Another quote related to emotional loneliness is this man in his 40s who says, you know, you're stood in the yard doing your work, you're on the tractor, all the management decisions come to me, no one else. So everything that goes right is my achievement, and everything that goes wrong is my problem. I think that really touches on the pride and work that the farming community has, right? It's like, it's all up to me. Like if I work hard enough, things will go right. And if things go wrong though, you know, I have to deal with those consequences. Spend most of the day on my own, but I wouldn't say it's the loneliness in itself that gets to me. It's probably the loneliness within the context of the business. The pressure comes to me on my own, and I have to deal with everything on my own. So, you know, there's a lot of pressure that comes with that. And I wish, you know, I could tell this guy, like, you're not on your own, right? There's a lot of other farmers dealing with similar problems. We have a lot of great professionals out there that can help. So making sure that people understand, you know, like, hey, like, I know there's a lot of pressure, but we're here to help. A final quote from Farming Man in his 30s said, you know, when you first started out, you're working with your family, you kind of lose some of that family support because farming takes over all the family time. So especially when, you know, he's broken something on the farm, he's getting an earful from his dad, and then you go home and you're still living with your parents. You know, it's like this, we had this fight at work, and then I go home and we're still together. And it's tough sometimes to kind of delineate and partition off those types of relationships that we have with each other. And finally, touching on cultural loneliness, you know, we talk about the importance of community and feeling like we belong in our communities, and how that can impact our health and our purpose. So cultural loneliness is largely related to feeling poorly understood and even to some extent marginalized. For farmers, that might include feelings of disconnection or even antagonism with members of the rural community and the wider public. So it's not necessarily the quantity or quality of social connections for cultural loneliness, but rather the perception of the person's culture and identity is somehow underrepresented, misconstrued, or under threat, or, you know, kind of just misunderstood. Feeling like, you know, people maybe don't value the work I'm doing, or they don't understand how difficult it might be. You know, without farms, there's no food, right? Sometimes you hear that when the price of eggs was up, right? People are like, how could farmers be so greedy? It's like, they're not the ones that are raising the prices. They're not the ones reaping the benefits. You know, there's just a disconnection between understanding how farms operate and the rest of society, sometimes that can get frustrating and make you feel like you don't belong. So some of the contributing factors for cultural loneliness in farming include the contracting size of the farming community. We're losing farms all the time. Sense of disconnection, maybe feeling misunderstood, a lack of public understanding, and then a lot of policy pressures and demands as well. Making sure that you're reaching, you're checking off all the boxes, you're meeting all the regulation requirements, you're doing everything correctly, and you're hitting all your marks. So some quotes from farmers about cultural loneliness. This is a farming gentleman in his 50s, so around the average age of a farmer in America, at least. I said the thing that makes him feel a bit lonely and down is he's worked hard for the last 30 years to invest in the business, right? He's been working on trying to do everything right. We try to be best in class, only to find out realistically, however hard you work, you can never really get a fair return for your endeavor. And this is, in Britain. I don't understand what people want from agriculture anymore. So that's what makes him feel a bit lonely and a bit sad, kind of like that disconnection, especially when you have so much pride in your work and then you feel like you're misunderstood. That can be, a big downer and make you feel lonely for sure. Another quote here from a farming woman in her 40s. She said, talking about her dad, in the village he's in, all the old farming families have gone. It's just him and another farming family. That's all that's left. We talked about, the importance of having those community connections and being able to rely on other farmers sometimes. Maybe a piece of equipment breaks down and another farmer can come over and help, or you can help them out, and you build that network. But when those farming families start to, move on, or they're just not there anymore for that connection, it can feel kind of existential in a way of, my way of life is being threatened. And then here's another quote. I think another loneliness that affects farmers is the community loneliness. So this is feeling misunderstood even within their own community, especially, like rural communities, where he shared getting sly comments from someone that's walking on a trail near the farm, or someone flipping him off on the road or beeping their horn because the tractor's not going fast enough on the interstate or on the highway. People feeling frustrated with you, and you're doing your best. You have different ways of life, and it feels like there's this disconnect. So you get the sense that the local community isn't really your best friend. You feel a bit of an alien on your own doorstep. That's even with these family farms that have been there for generations and generations. It's like, we've been here for a long time. We've been doing this, and maybe it's like the community starts to change around them and you don't feel like you're in the loop. So that's a very, very broad, very fast overview of just kind of 3 different types of loneliness and how that's connected to farming culture and identities at large and in general. That farming culture and identity is at the center of our full farming experiences. It shapes those different drivers of specific loneliness for farmers and farming communities and farming families, and understanding how farming impacts personal values and identities and those specific drivers of social well-being. It's important for us to understand those aspects so that we can create those culturally competent, resources, how we want to interact with these farmers and farm families and farm workers, and provide the best services that we can. So that's my hopefully quick enough explanation of loneliness. This is like the soapbox I stand on for everything. So hopefully, you picked something out of here that could be useful. And I'll share a link to that article in the chat as well. I geeked out on it for like a full week. I was always constantly emailing Remy like, hey, I found another thing. Like, I have so many highlights. So I'm more than happy to share that with you all as well.
Yeah, thank you, Tanner. That was great. I think this gives us a lot to think about, different opportunities that we have for working with farmers. One of the first things I think of, and Corey and I just talked about this, if I think about my dad and other farmers, they'll do anything for a fellow farmer or a family member. They will work all day and night for someone else. And so, that's a great motivation. that they have, and we can, in a way, use that to suggest that therapy and putting on, improving your own behavioral health can help your family members and your fellow farmers. This can be something that benefits the farm. So we often talk about, you have to put on the airplane, they tell you you have to put your own air mask on, oxygen first before helping others. And I think when we have these conversations, shaping it in that way, that this is something that will benefit the people around you. Even if this isn't something that you're going to be willing to do just for yourself, this is something that can help the other people around you. And then that last point with the cultural loneliness, I definitely don't want this to come off as like silver lining this, but it seems that there is like a change in the wind regarding this. More and more people are using farm markets as like a leisure activity. I was just watching a wonderful episode of Modern Marvels about the supermarket, and 100 years ago plus, farmers markets were how everyone got their food. And now we have a supermarket, and there's like this returning back to farmers markets being a place of community. And I want to spend some time here on my day off. For folks that are not farmers, I want to go there and meet with the farmer, interact with them. Tanner, I wonder if you could just maybe off the cuff make a suggestion on like some other areas here, or like other opportunities that we have, or just kind of make those real for us. Like how can we take advantage of this for the benefit of farmers?
Yeah. I think a large part of it is understanding. Part of it is being able to identify, like, okay, this is a feeling of loneliness. This is a symptom of loneliness. Understanding that there's something that you can do about it. A lot of times when we look at those stressors, they're external things that we might not have control over. Like I don't have control over the weather. I don't have necessarily control over the markets, but I have a way to impact how I'm feeling right now. So part of it might be making sure that you can get out there and go to the farmer's market, trying to have those interactions with other people. For loneliness in general, we recommend trying to find something that you enjoy doing. Trying to do something nice for others is a great way to try to, lessen that impact of loneliness and build that sense of belonging and purpose. So even if it's, having those coffee hours, if it's, going in and volunteering to help, fix a piece of machinery for someone else, or I was going to say, one of the things we promote in our health programs is mindfulness. Mindfulness is another great activity to be in touch and kind of connect with yourself first and understand, okay, this is, how I'm feeling right now. This is what I want. This is what I need. And being able to emotionally regulate a lot of that emotional loneliness. And that makes it easier to connect with others as well. So mindfulness resources are always great too. I always try to promote all that.
Perfect. Yeah,
If I could add something
please.
that I think was missed here, farmers on any scale at all really can't be friends with their neighboring farmers because they're all in competition for the same land. And that friendship it's not that they can't be friends, but it's a whole lot harder because they're all in competition with each other.
Yeah, that's a great point. The Hatfield and McCoys, the rivalries in these farm families that could be going back for generations. But yeah, that competitiveness, in this space, the capitalistic side of farming. Yeah, that's a great point. And so, there may be room there to, make bridges across that divide of, we're all in this together. And, but for some that won't happen. So it just in my own family, we have these rivalries with other, cattle farmers in this space in the community. And maybe not rivalry is the right term, but competitor, there's yeah, that's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up. I want to just take a moment here to pause and just open it up, and if anyone else has any comments or questions.
Yeah, I think to Bev's point, there's actually, I think there's differences even between like subcultures within agriculture. I've been, some commodities, some types of farming are much more open up your financial books and share with each other. You know, I've got cheese producers that do that. And then I'm, you know, I was working with some horseradish farms down in Illinois area, and extremely tight with any information, to the point that, you know, even things that were hurting the industry, but because they wouldn't share outside the industry. So there's a lot of subcultures within agriculture. It's not a broad stroke, I would say.
Thanks, Dan. Could you just briefly introduce yourself?
Oh, sure. My name is Stan Moore. I work with farm business management up in northern Lower Peninsula and up into the eastern UP. So I do a lot with farm financial analysis, farm succession. That's put me working with Remington on a number of farms that are in stressful situations, oftentimes because of intergenerational transfer of the farm assets, or they're going through just a rough financial time. So.
Thanks, Dan.
Mhm.
Okay. So just a little bit more on this portion of the impact of farmer culture on mental health. Again, from this Farm Bureau data, rural adults they report that mental health is important to them or their families. So I think this is good news for us. Overwhelmingly, they report mental health is very important. And so, tapping into this motivation to improve mental health, improve the health of the farm and the business, this is an opportunity for us to help bridge that divide between mental health care, behavioral health, and then the farmer. The same study, I'm just going to take a step back here. The same study asked farmers about barriers to seeking help. They acknowledge that this is an important area, that the mental health is important. But what is it that's preventing farmers from connecting with therapy or mental health support? And these rural adults in this poll reported fears about cost, embarrassment, and then stigma would all three be obstacles if they were to seek help or treatment for a mental health condition. The good news is that this stigma has declined. So the image I showed was from a poll from 2019. December 2021, there was another report showing that stigma and availability of treatment are less of a barrier, but it still is an obstacle. And so, there's reportedly increasing acceptance for seeking mental health support for stress, but there still is this stigma. And so, fighting stigma in whatever platform we're in, just normalizing, discussions on mental health is important. I'm hearing that a shot. Yeah, there's no sign right now. So another part about this that I want to mention is that opioid use and misuse are concerns in rural areas too. And 3 out of 4 farmers report that it would be easy to access opioids, and 1 out of 4 farmers report taking opioids that have not been prescribed to them. Compounding this is the geographical shortage of mental health care professionals and primary care clinics and hospitals. 62% of rural or partially rural areas are They have inadequate medical infrastructure. So, this is just another challenge feeding into this issue. And is this graph now showing? Okay. So, really this at the end of the day is why we're doing this, why we're having this meeting, why we're doing this work, is suicide prevention. And so, there's a lot of other reasons, but to me, this is number one, is reducing suicide risk among farmers. And, this data here shows that suicide risk is almost double among ag, forestry, fishing, and hunting among these professions than the population average. So I just want to acknowledge that that there's a high suicide risk among farmers for all of these other reasons that we've mentioned. So now kind of changing gears into some what can we do about this? So what are some approaches that we can incorporate into our work with farmers? First and last, it's going to be this building rapport and trust. This is a crucial part of our approach to engaging with farmers, and no matter what population, building trust and rapport is going to be critical. Taking the time to understand, these unique challenges faced by individual farmers, and showing empathy and understanding is essential. I know this is something that we all do already, but I just wanted to elevate and echo that and underline that point. And then incorporating farmer culture into therapy can also be helpful, or other support that we're giving. An example of this would be using farm analogies to explain concepts or discuss practical strategies that align with a farmer's way of life. And so, I'm going to take just one step back here and reiterate that suggesting therapy to a farmer can be challenging. As soon as I say the word therapy in a room of farmers, I can feel the temperature of the room drop. And, a lot of farmers may not have the same exposure to behavioral health resources as those living in urban areas. However, a couple strategies that we can employ: expressing concern. Start the conversation by expressing your concern for the farmer's well-being. Let them know that you've noticed that they may be going through a tough time and that you care about their health and happiness. We've seen this work. When we get to the case studies, I'll share an anecdote about that. Normalizing therapy. When I give presentations, I like to take a moment and explain what it is. There seems to be there's like mysticism around the word therapy. There's this stigma around the word therapy. And so just, normalizing this, explaining that, seeking therapy is common, it's effective, it can be an effective way to deal with challenges of life. And, letting the farmer know that this is something that benefits many people, including those in agriculture. We love to, whenever we have someone that's willing to speak about their time in therapy, the farmer, we love to sit down with them and record that. Having community champions and role models that look like the population we're trying to work with. Providing information, offering information, that kind of goes in with the normalizing therapy, but providing information about the benefits of therapy and then how to access that. I also have an idea that I'll just throw out here. I would love to have I want to do a video of a therapy session with a farmer and a therapist, and just, this is what it looks like. This is, it's two people in a room having a conversation, no straight jacket involved. This is just a normal, there's chairs. This is just a normal, situation. This is something that people go through. But yeah, just, what is therapy? How do I access it? And then what are the benefits of it? So if you know of resources in the area or support groups, you can share that information. And yeah, being patient. recognize that farmers may not be ready to seek help, seek therapy right away. And so just letting them know that you're available to talk, and then providing that support whenever they're ready. And, to use the analogies, planting seeds. I love to plant seeds and then return to water those every so often. And eventually those will blossom. And so a lot of these, building the rapport, building trust takes time. But yeah, overall, the key is to approach conversation with empathy and understanding. Let the farmer know that you care about them and that seeking therapy is a positive step toward healing and growth. So I just want to expand a little bit more on this. Building rapport and trust is crucial. This can be accomplished by taking the time to understand these unique challenges like we're doing today. And incorporating farmer specific language. You don't want to be too jargony when you're having these conversations. You want to avoid more technical dialogue. Incorporating analogies like planting the seeds, and then beyond like the language, making suggestions that will work for the farmer, practical strategies that align with a farmer's way of life. Tanner and I have been working on developing tractor mindfulness and incorporating mindfulness practices into daily farm tasks, such as a mindful walk around the farm, or practicing deep breathing while you're milking cows, or the tractor mindfulness that we're working on, when just being aware of the sounds of the machine, and just taking a moment to connect with your surroundings. So incorporating these practical strategies in a way that aligns with farm culture. And building on this, we should all encourage farmers to practice self-care and engage with social supports. So as we heard from Tanner, loneliness is a area, is an opportunity for us to encourage farmers to connect with one another. Farmers, often are focused on taking care of their land, their crops, their animals, and they may be neglecting their own self-care needs. And if they live on the farm, they see their chores right outside the window. They may receive a call at 3 a.m. that the cattle are out and they have to go bring them in. What I like to encourage farmers, in this regard of work-life separation, and again, as I'm sure most of us are aware, the more clearly defined your work and your personal life are, the healthier, better health outcomes you'll see. One example from a farmer I heard when I mentioned this, it's important to have a separation between your work and your personal life. A farmer came back to me and he told me what he did, and I share this now with almost every group I talked with. He lives on the farm, so he's not able to do a physical distance separation between work. But when he comes home, he has a little simple mental switch. So he comes home, sits down at the door, and he takes his boots off. And when those boots come off, that's a signal to him that it is his time, personal time to recharge, time to engage in those self-care activities. And then when the boots come on, it's time to go to work. And so if he looks over and the work boots are off, that's personal time. When the work boots are on, time to go to work. And so, physical separation may be impossible, but having that mental separation is something that can be effective for farmers, and something that's important to be aware of. We don't want to make a suggestion to a farmer like, oh, you should just, leave work at the end of the day, just buy a new house across town. That's not going to be a helpful suggestion. So finding something that will work for them. I also want to just echo one more time, making suggestions to connect with social support. Farmers often do have this strong sense of community and rely on peers for support. And so we should further encourage this and impress upon them how important it is to spend, non-work time with friends and family. Again, creating that separation between work and home. When you're socializing, sometimes it can be there's a blending of social and work. We're working together on this piece of equipment. There should be, we should encourage spending time socializing outside of work. It doesn't necessarily have to be on the job, but doing something that is outside of work hours. In sum, you should take into consideration the unique characteristics and stressors that we've talked about that come with farming. And then by building rapport and trust, incorporating farmer culture, using practical strategies, encouraging support and self-care, we can effectively support farmers in improving their mental health and well-being. So this last portion here, just want to go over a couple real life case examples, real life case studies, real life examples from my time working with farmers, discuss some of the challenges and successes encountered with this work, and then some lessons learned and maybe a couple best practices. So I'll go ahead and share a bit here, and then I'll open up the floor again to hear maybe from Corey and Stan if they have some examples. But let's see here. So this group, I shared this image already. The veterinarian reached out first that they needed some support. And this is something that I've seen elsewhere, where it's the veterinarian. So it's an ag adjacent individual who is reaching out and has identified. So working with these gatekeepers is really important, working with other extension professionals who are on the farm, because there is this stigma, this hesitancy for farmers to seek help, even for physical health. Dad's not going to the hospital unless there's a bone. There's really this hesitancy for some farmers. So working with veterinarians to, connect, and then meeting them where they are. You can see here, obviously I'm, right there on the farm, and going out and meeting with them, spending some time with them. And yeah, I think that's the point that I wanted to make with this, is connecting with those ag professionals who aren't necessarily farmers themselves, but can help us connect with farmers. So here's a video that I'm gonna quickly, I think I'll just share the link to this, and you can watch this on your own time. But this is Kelly here that we can see. Jim and Kelly, they own a cattle farm in northern Michigan. And same thing, veterinarian reached out to us. And so veterinarian noticed that there was this change in Jim in the wake of his cattle contracting TB. And so they had to euthanize some of the herd. There was a public notice shared, his name and reputation was kind of dragged through the mud. And he was exhibiting some worrying signs that the veterinarian picked up on. Flat affect, used to be a more bubbly guy, and there's this, really significant change. And so we reached out, the vet reached out to us, we reached out to Jim and Kelly. We were able to enroll both of them in our teletherapy. And a couple months go by, and he reaches back out to us just to say thank you, and shared that, this teletherapy saved the farm and likely saved his life. And so that was a really profound moment to me, and I've shared this with many of you. So, but working with community champions like this has been really helpful for us. Again, the veterinarian, an ag professional that was able to connect us here, and then taking it a step further. Jim, he really he still feels passionately about sharing this message and letting farmers know that there is help available. And I am forever grateful for him for being able to, stand up here and tell us about his story, and, being a role model for other farmers. And I've just found this to be incredibly helpful. Having someone in the community being able to speak up to this. I was born and raised in the ag community, but I have a PhD from a university on the East Coast. So, having a community champion be able to share this message, I think, is really, really important. Oh, it's going to play anyways. Finally, this isn't a picture of them. I don't have permission to use their names or anything, but I have one last story that I want to share. And this is that I mentioned it a little bit earlier. Grandma on the farm came to me, was at one of my talks and heard about this and heard about our offerings. She came to me and was like, hey, daughters aren't really talking. We have this farm operation happening. We're going through a bit of a pivot and transition planning. It's really stressful on all of us. And I'm worried about the family falling apart, and these rifts, happening within the family. Stan and I met with them. Stan was able to help a bit with the, financial landscape, business planning part of this. And then I was able to connect grandma and grandpa with the teletherapy. They start going through it, and, they see that this is really helping and benefiting them. And we agree to take the message to the kids. I say kids, they're in their 40s and 50s, but the younger generation, and take this message of this is something that will benefit the farm. And so, even outside of that, doing it for yourself to improve yourself, but using that message of this is something that is good for the farm, good for the family, and is, critical for the success of the business. We need to take care of ourselves so that the business can succeed and thrive. And we really found that to be helpful. And I've used that since then, of pitching it as, this is something that you need to do for the survival of the farm, for the business to thrive. So that's just kind of a little lesson that I learned working with this family. And, eventually, another, daughter and spouse enrolled. A couple weeks go by, another daughter spouse enrolled, and now there's 7 or 8 members of this family that are enrolled in the therapy. And I think it all, having the one role model, and then bringing that message of this is good for the business, this is good for something outside yourself, just like how we talked about earlier, the sense of, I'll do anything for my family and do anything for my fellow farmers, but I'm not really prioritizing myself. I guess I'll just open it up now to see if Stan wanted to share maybe just an example, or Corey, if you have, even if there's no lesson learned, really just hearing about these experiences, I think is valuable.
I can play off a little bit on what you were just talking about, Remington, with just the communication and involving the whole family in the teletherapy. Oftentimes when we're working with farms on, especially things like farm succession, but maybe it's they're partway through the transfer process. A lot of things happen around the issue of poor communication, just not understanding, not sharing with one another, and this can create kind of a bad perception of the way things are, or maybe just not a full understanding of the financial picture on the farm. And I was thinking about what Tanner said about just the loneliness factor, and sometimes that may be a perception. Of course, perception's reality to the person that's going through it, but it may be that there's tons of people around them that love them, but yet they're seeing themselves as lonely. And that can happen with finances too, is we just don't have because of the farm stress situation, we just don't have a good picture of what's going on. And so what we try to do with the business side of things is to give a clearer picture. Oftentimes the farmer will have first generation, second generation, third generation will have some idea of what's going on, but they may not have a full picture. So just a few examples. One of those being a grandpa and grandson, for instance, that, the grandson and his dad knew that the farm is not making money. What they didn't know is how much grandpa was basically pulling out of his retirement every year to keep this going. And it was not going to happen for very much longer, and so being able to come alongside them and share that financial information. For whatever reason, grandpa didn't feel like he wanted to share that, individually, but as a group, we were able to talk about it and say, this something's got to change here. Farm can't survive going in this mode. So bringing communication around that, with farm succession, that's certainly the case. And if there's not clear communication, then people make up their own stories, and that's usually not a good story that gets made up from either way. So there becomes a lot of trust issues. And so oftentimes when we're coming to the farm, some of that's been broken down already. And so it's oftentimes doing a farm financial analysis with them and saying, okay, well, this is where the farm's at. There's some problems. Here's some ways that, solution, trying to offer some level of hope there. There's hope in any case, even if the farm has to be sold, there's hope at the end of that. So trying to work with them to see through what that could look like down the road, and kind of how this could work. So that's just a little bit about what we do, I guess, with farms, and Corey can add to that. But that's why we think finances are an important part of this picture, is to really help bring some clarity to that, not make it more stressful, but hopefully less stressful as they begin to get a handle on what they need to do. So.
Thanks, Dan. I'm just having a bit of technical difficulty with my camera here.
Yeah.
Corey, would you mind sharing a bit?
Sure. Like Stan, I do a lot with succession planning, and one of the families that I worked with was an interesting case. His dad and two sons involved in the farm, mom present and involved with the relationships in the family, but not so much on the actual farm. And a lot of times what I do to kind of get started is talk with each of the members involved, and then also do a financial analysis. And so I talked with each of the members involved, and one of the things that was really clear is that there was a lot of conflict, in particular between dad and one of the sons. And the second son was kind of observing all this, and that was a stressor for him. And kind of similar for mom, observing all this and a stressor for her. In this case, the financial analysis showed things were fine. The farm was meeting their expectations. But of course, the financial worries and the risks involved in farming were kind of in the background of these things and of this whole situation. And I worked primarily with the dad, and the dad was really struggling. I mean, very emotional, a lot of like inner turmoil, loneliness, from a social standpoint, and especially from an emotional standpoint, was a huge factor. I think the sons felt that way as well. And I hadn't heard until today, I hadn't heard loneliness discussed in this framework. And Tanner, that was fantastic, because it describes what I hear from farmers a lot all the time. And in this particular case, it came to a point where the dad was kind of spinning his wheels, I guess, emotionally. And I said, look, it doesn't have to be this way. And recommended that he pursue therapy. And we had the teletherapy program. And he was open to the idea because honestly, he was miserable. The emotional situation, the family and the relationships, it was worth seeking some help for him, despite stigma, despite, the rugged independence. It was worth it because it felt so awful. And it turns out the son with the most conflict is around has actually left the farm, but the relationships between the parents and the sons, including the one that left, have improved tremendously just by one person seeking therapy on the farm. It was really demonstrated how powerful that is and how necessary it is and what a difference it can make.
Thank you, Corey. Yeah, I think that ripple effect, it may be harder to quantify and measure that, but I often have seen that be important. Thanks, Corey. Anyone else want to share? Maybe some real life examples working with farmers?
I want to share something. It's adjacent. So I didn't grow up farming. I don't have, direct family members that farm necessarily. I have like second cousins that have farms. I grew up in a rural area. But being able to talk to farmers and just being upfront and honest with them, like, hey, like, let me learn more about it. Farmers have such pride in their work. A lot of the farms that have been in the family for generations, like, tell me a story about your farm. Being able to connect with people. And, we had this conversation, I think earlier this week, about farmers are intuitive. They can tell if you're you're feeding them a load of crap, right? Very down to earth people. It's like, all right, I'm going to be real with you and authentic with you, and I want you to be able to share your honest story with me, and I'm going to be honest in return. And I think that's been a big piece, and that's why I enjoy working with the farm community so much as well. And these are generalizations. There's always individuals on all ends of the spectrums from all walks of life. But I think that's just such an important piece too. And knowing that farmers do have all that pride in their work as well, is like, it can be a benefit too, right? There's reasons people enjoy farming and why they like farming, and finding that common ground to kind of work from too, I've found really beneficial.
Yeah, I think we should be honest with the individuals we're working with, and we shouldn't say that because we sat in on a 2-hour webinar about farmer culture that we're an expert on farmer culture if we're not. So, because farmers do have a really good detector for that. So, anything else?
I would add that farmer culture on a dairy farm versus a crop farm versus a specialty crop farm versus all the different kind of farms varies tremendously. It helps, and I come from a dairy farm, so I'm really comfortable with dairy farmer culture. It is a lot different for me to work with a specialty crop farm, for example. But to come in knowing that these cultures, maybe these things that Remy has talked about, may show up in different ways on different farms, I think is really important.
Yeah, thank you, Corey. Yeah, so in conclusion, it's great for us to be aware of farmer culture in order to provide effective care to farmers. And then, so by incorporating this culturally sensitive approach, building rapport and trust, using these practical strategies, we can help farmers improve their mental health and their mental health outcomes. I just want to say I salute all of you for your work in this space and your willingness to learn more about farmer culture. I want to share a couple resources here. So the bottom link here is really interesting. So University of Wisconsin Green Bay, they have a course on this topic, and I think it's like $85. So if you wanted to take a deeper dive into this topic and learn more about understanding farmer culture, I think this would be a great place to start. I also provided, article here on the topic and some other resources. APA has this page on farmer mental wellness. And then, of course, MSU Extension can be a resource as well. You can reach out to me. You can reach out to any of the other MSU educators on the call. Again, want to say that I salute all of you for your work in this space. This is definitely a population that needs support. Yeah, that's all. Any other questions or comments before we wrap up? Great. I'm